Hey there folks! Last time you were with me, we went over the wide world of 90s cartoons and queer representation, as a period marked by cultural contradiction which saw a growing perception of kids shows as some kind of breeding ground for the indoctrination of young people to the ways of the gays and transgenders, despite very few real positive examples of that. It was certainly one well worth covering, and cover it we did. In our hunt to see how these topics were really presented during this period, we looked at shows like Ed, Edd and Eddy, Hey Arnold, The Simpsons, Lloyd in Space, and many more, concluding the reality that, though a couple vaguely progressive, genuinely accepting episodes could be found as we dug through the archives, they were, for the most part, vastly overshadowed by shows that turned LGBT people into overblown punchlines.
Tonight, you're sleeping on the sofa!
If they were even willing to openly depict them instead of hiding behind authorial claims. But alas, I made a fatal error with this episode. An error I simply couldn't have predicted. One which threatens to damage the integrity of me and my work. I did not watch every single episode of every single 90s cartoon. To be serious, the comment section on our last video did a great job of pointing out a few shows worth a look for a more cumulative understanding of this topic, either because they genuinely did a good job of covering it, or because they, kinda didn't.
If I help you with this, do you promise to get out of my gender and stay out?
So, I decided to correct my grievous error and check at least some of these suggestions out, while I finished the script on my next big long video about a very bad film.
This is our land!
All this to say, I'm going to be quickly running through these episodes, giving a few thoughts, and then leaving it up to you, the viewer. I'll probably be using some language you might not understand unless you watch my previous video, so if you haven't done so yet, please watch that first. Link in the description. Without further ado, let's duck into the old saggy sack and pull us out some queer-geared animated treats. Quick note. I know a lot of you brought up Sailor Moon after I put up my last video, and even from just the cursory understanding I had about the show, I was slamming my head against the table realising I'd missed it.
Welcome to the game room, Sailor Scout! What?
Sailor Moon is both a perfect example of solid 90s cartoon LGBT representation, and a perfect example of how this stuff was repressed for most Western audiences. This hugely popular show, marketed primarily towards kids, had not just one but two gay couples, both boys and girls, the latter of which are among the main cast of the show. No one and done cameos here. Or at least, these are gay couples if you watch the Japanese version, or read up on the original manga. Because in the original American release, yep, those gay gals are actually...
They're girls and cousins too. You're the best cousins in the world.
My cousin wants to know if you'd like to race her again.
We're cousins. We grew up together.
Huh?
Those gay dudes? Well, actually, one is a lady. Open gay flirtation becomes inoffensive snark, touchy-feely moments become just bros being bros.
What's better than this? Guys being dudes.
Entire storylines which put more emphasis into this stuff either get highly dubbed over or edited. It's pretty much the worst possible treatment of a fantastic show of representation, topped only by the Russian release, which instead makes one of the gay characters actually a man who transforms into a woman at will. Accidental gender fluidity, yeah! And the Albanian release, which just straight up cuts the seasons which feature these characters. The sad part is that so many people I spoke to about my last video cited Sailor Moon as one of the properties that introduced them to LGBT positivity as a kid. Albeit only after some further research. It leaves me to wonder how many more queer kids out there may have benefited from shows like this, which treat LGBT concepts with such a degree of normalcy. And it also makes me wish I'd actually watched this show as a kid. You see, being raised as a young lad in the regular old needlessly gendered world most of us grew up in, there were two shows I wanted to watch but felt an intolerable discomfort about the idea of being seen to do so. Sailor Moon and Powerpuff Girls. Too much pink, too many love hearts, too many little girls frolicking about firing rainbows. In a world where all of these things were basically giant flaming warning labels reading, "For girls, not for boys," it all wound up just scaring me off. As such, while I did want to get in real deep with a segment on this show, I just don't have the background watching it to really speak about it with authority. This isn't just about watching one or two specific queer issue episodes to get me up to speed. These are entire seasons covering these relationships, and as much as I tried to write around it, it felt so unfair to just try and vaguely describe something I haven't really gone through. So here's my acknowledgement that Sailor Moon is a great example of everything I've spoke about, and a light suggestion to occasionally remind me to get through the show so I can do a full video about it. Encouraging my audience to pester me about something on social media? That'll definitely work out well. Over the course of its run, King of the Hill had quite a few episodes at least circling around the bowl of the Lugabitas. Most generally positive, and at least with their hearts quote unquote in the right place. This is something sort of granted to them by virtue of the fact that King of the Hill was not a kids show, though it's included here because, much like with The Simpsons, a lot of kids wound up watching it anyway. Remember, can't talk about the quiz directly to kids. That's basically just one step away from showing them Boku no Pico, apparently. Episode 16 of Season 6, My Own Private Rodeo, introduces us to Dale's out-of-the-closet father, Bug, in the midst of he and his wife Nancy renewing their wedding vows for one reason or another. The big joke of the episode is that Dale isn't actually aware his father is gay, and while he had disowned dear old dad from his family, it wasn't due to his homosexuality, but quite the opposite. Dale saw his dad trying to lock lips with dear sweet Nancy, and has sworn him off ever since. In trying to fix the rift between Dale and Bug, Hank discovers the reality that the apparent womanizing incident was actually a last-ditch attempt by Bug to cover up his sexuality to his son, a panicked act gone horribly wrong. The revelation that Bug even had a son sends him and his partner Juan Pedro into a dangerous spat, and Hank heads off to try and explain the situation to Dale. Dale's not having it, even when his dad arrives to finally out himself to his son. In typical Dale fashion, he gathers up that his dad is hiding a deep secret and has a male partner, and declares that he must therefore be FBI. To make a long story short, the misunderstanding eventually gets resolved, and after all the build-up, Dale finally realizes his father's sexuality, to which he is fine with it. Dale is honestly more just relieved to find out his dad isn't a secret government agent, and ultimately indifferent to his dad's homosexuality. Now, for a show set in suburban Texas, the heartland of good old conservative values, I'd say this was a pretty smart way of handling gay panic. The framework of the disowned gay family member, rejected for their deviant behaviour, is a pretty common one in media, and obviously echoes the reality for many people, especially at this time, and especially in these sorts of communities. The fact that this show manages to take that narrative and use what we know about the characters to create something a lot more light-hearted and ultimately accepting without the need for the typical self-serious facing the queer issue episode, that's pretty neat. A few foibles here and there, like Bug's Latino lover basically fitting every possible flamboyant gay stereotype, and the whole, I don't know, he's gay so he works at a gay rodeo. It's just a joke, it really doesn't matter that much. Overall, I'm pleasantly surprised by this one. A change of pace from the usual, he's gay, gasp, hold for audience laughter, is always a pleasant thing. And hey, look, they did an episode about gender identity too. I bet this one will be just as...
I just had the best time with this new girl, Peggy Hill. I don't know what his real name is.
So in this episode, Peggy's feeling self-conscious due to the paranoia that she's regularly perceived as mannish. Her interests aren't super ladylike, her aesthetic isn't the most feminine, and most importantly, she's got big feet. Things take a turn for the better when she bumps into Carolyn, a charming young lady also suffering from an unfortunate foot size problem. They hit off, and Carolyn, being quite the fashionista, even helps Peggy pick out some new outfits to make her feel more like a woman. Peggy's happy to meet a lady who she feels such a strong connection to, until, drumroll please, that's no lady. It turns out Carolyn is actually Jamie, a part-time drag queen, working under the assumption that Peggy is also a drag queen due to her more quote-unquote masculine appearance and behaviour. To make matters worse, Carolyn has invited Peggy along to perform with them at a drag show, which apparently is a problem because, I don't know, I guess bio queens aren't a thing here. When all of this is revealed to Peggy, she breaks down and Hank is forced to try and comfort her. In some ways, this is all reminiscent of the gay episode, flipping the script on what we might expect with this kind of social issue story. Instead of being upset that his dad's gay, Dale is upset because he doesn't know his dad's gay. Instead of the drag queen having to deal with misgendering, it's Peggy being misgendered by the drag queen. But, as you might be feeling at this point, here it seems a little more messy. With the help of Hank, who is actually super sensitive about this issue, never overtly calling Carolyn out, but always referring to the respective persona he wishes to speak to.
Hello, Carolyn. I was calling to get Jamie's number. Oh, he is? Oh, that'd be great. Hello, Jamie.
Peggy and Carolyn make amends. She then bonds with the drag queens, who, as some comfort, are in love with Peggy's particular brand of femininity. So the message of this episode seems to be floating around the area of femininity is not so rigid as we make it out to be, there are different types of femininity. But then something feels odd about this conflation of Peggy's incidental, atypical gender mannerisms with the overt performance of drag. Again, I think their heart's in the right place here. Peggy's pain is inward, she never shames Carolyn for being a drag queen. Carolyn isn't really shown as being, erratic or irrational in some way. But it feels reductive both to cis women and drag queens that, essentially, cis women who don't look or act in a stereotypically feminine way and drag culture are being lumped together here. Is it like Peggy and the drag queens are together broadening that which we call feminine? Is it Peggy acts outside of traditional femininity and that's okay because she has drag queen powers to share that experience with? Or maybe more optimistically, is it the drag queens who are introducing Peggy to an established different notion of femininity that they have cultivated and are welcoming her into? Something feels off, at least to me, but I do give a thumbs up to the show for again confronting this, especially to demonstrate how a conservative southern family could confront these issues in a less antagonistic way. And hey, I am not the authority here. Definitely more than happy to check through comments below and chat about what your response to the episode might be, especially if this is a culture you're more familiar with. And now for something completely different. Bling Blong, this show right here is the bomb is shit and fell right into the early 2000s adult cartoon field of horribly mismanaged from beginning to end. The show was pulled from the WB network's late night slot after just 2 episodes, then a year later came back for another 4, then the full season didn't finish airing until the show got a cult following at Adult Swim, not including the last 5 episodes which never got funded past Animax. And yes, by extension it never made it past the first season, which sucks because the show has a vibrant, striking look, very down-to-earth characters that are easy to connect with, and manages to move deftly between the issues of aimless 20-somethings, self-conscious teens, and yes, the gays. Specifically, the de facto series finale, Plan 9 from Mission Hill, or I Married a Gay Man from Outer Space. Kevin, the teen brother of layabout main character Andy, is dealing with puberty stuff. Ever the goody two-shoes, Kevin starts to find himself having urges on passing a local movie theatre advertising adult screenings, eventually caving into them insatiable pubescent feels and getting himself a ticket. Joke's on him, it's actually a screening of the 1969 classic Midnight Cowboy, the story of a young gay prostitute struggling in New York. As Kevin's neighbour and co-owner of the theatre, Wally, explains, Midnight Cowboy's infamous X rating came not from the fact that it was particularly horny or pornographic a film, but from the fact that it was a frank depiction of homosexuality at a time when that was far from the norm. While it wasn't quite what he was looking for, the movie still piques Kevin's interest in classic cinema, and him and Wally make a weekly habit of checking out the latest prestige movie reruns together. Wally teaches Kevin about new ways to enjoy film, not just to view movies as some consumable object built simply to generate mass appeal, but to observe and appreciate as the result of a personal vision. This all comes to a crashing halt on the discovery of a movie that all had thought to be lost to the sands of time. The Man from Pluto, an obscure science fiction movie from back in the day. Kevin and company take this as noteworthy mostly for the fact that the eponymous Pluto Man looks exactly like Gus, Wally's husband and the owner of the gang's local diner. It turns out, it is him, from an old movie starring him, written and directed by Wally. This takes Kevin aback, confused as to why Wally would hide such an achievement, but is mostly just happy to have discovered a copy of the once lost auteur relic. So much so, in fact, that Kevin spreads news of the film all across town, and before you know it, pretty much everyone in Mission Hill arrives to check out the film's first grand showing. It's, different.
I am here at last.
In fact, in the tradition of Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's a camp-ridden movie with bizarre attempts at visual effects, awkward and stilted dialogue, and utterly nonsensical casting choices, particularly when it comes to Gus himself. More thug with an anchor tattoo from an old gangster movie than otherworldly alien from distant planets.
Your weapons is like toys!
Wally despairs at seeing the audience slowly begin falling into fits of laughter, and he heads home with Gus. After some pressuring, Wally tells the story of how the movie ended up like that. They Come From the Stars, a sci-fi allegory on Cold War politics, was to be Wally's first big break back when he was an aspiring director, an opportunity to chase his dream project with decent studio backing. The film, in fact, was shaping up pretty nicely until disaster struck. Wally fell head over heels in love for the roughneck stagehand working on set. So much is Wally enamored by this infatuation that he brings Gus on as the replacement for the lead character in his film, a decision which increasingly puts Gus at odds with his production team, causing disagreement after disagreement until eventually Gus was working on no budget and forced to make the best out of amateur performers, cardboard props, and basement set prestige. Changes were forced out of necessity, and Wally wound up so embarrassed by the finished product that he left Hollywood in disgrace. Here's the thing though, people aren't hating the film. In fact, with repeated showings at Wally's theatre, people are loving it. It's an instant cult hit, with audiences regularly getting tickets to examine the strange eccentricities and just plain anomalies of the work. Kevin, against all odds, convinces Wally maybe in some way he did make a great film.
You're the one who taught me that all great movies have a personal vision. Wally, this whole movie is your Valentine to Gus. It couldn't be any more personal.
Oh, that still doesn't make it great.
I'm not so sure.
For the first time in a while, Wally is pleased with what he's made of himself. He returns home to Gus, and the pair settle in to enjoy the rest of their lives together. Now, what you may have spotted here is that, at face value, this episode is not about the fact that Wally and Gus are gay. Their relationship is key to the story, but the fact that it's a gay relationship is incidental to the tale itself. Gus could have been Greta, and it'd still be basically the same story, of a young director too blinded by love to care about what those around them think. Again, at face value. What's so wonderful here is that the episode neither makes an issue out of their homosexuality, the main conflict here has nothing to do with the fact that Wally or Gus are gay, and yet deals directly with themes relating to gay representation. Kevin is awakened to the grand artistic potential of cinema by Midnight Cowboy, a film judged unfairly not by the production itself, but by it being perceived as a deviant depiction of sexuality which was, and I quote, a possible influence on youngsters. This allows Wally to show Kevin how these films can often be seen radically differently by these different audiences, the value of perception in acceptance, and the power of persisting with what energizes your particular vision. In a sense, we are talking about the gay struggle in these particularly oppressive periods, particularly when it comes to artistic work.
Whatever that guy did to get that part, I can do better. See ya.
Made explicit by the use of Midnight Cowboy as a jumping off point for the episode. To act on what we truly believe in, even if it isn't what those around us necessarily approve of. This is also a great metaphor for the show itself. Mission Hill is itself a show about outcasts, how people who feel rejected in society can come together and navigate the murky waters together. Kevin is a suburban nerd thrown into city life, Andy is a cartoonist struggling to fit within the capitalist structure, and Wally and Gus are, well, Wally and Gus. A gay couple at a time when gay couples were only acknowledged by society in the most limited possible terms. And that's one more point that Mission Hill earns as far as representation goes. In comparison to what we were mostly getting for gay representation in the late 90s, Gus and Wally are so regular. There is no flamboyance, no sticking to overly stereotypical archetypes, and as far as I can recall, their homosexuality was a peripheral part of their characters, not just an avenue for cheap laughs. Now, I could also talk about how the treatment of the show itself is a representation of this principle, that its mishandling by executives was a direct result of it not fitting easily within typical genre conformities, that the show itself was an outcast, but then I might just suffocate from going so far up my own arse about the show. Hey, it's really good. Wally and Gus are good representation. Thumbs up. Yes, go watch it, please, thank you. Now this is the one. Holy shit, am I glad I did not miss this. Thank you so much to the commenters who pointed this episode out to me. Robot Jones was a show I caught on and off as a young'un, the endearing story of a robot kid just trying to fit in a middle school which places him as essentially a token minority among humans. Robot Jones wants to understand human nature to help him adjust to others, and so each episode generally deals with some unique human concept for Jones to wrap his head around and maybe draw some deep philosophical conclusions. And boy oh boy did they pick a winner with Season 2 Episode 1. For copyright purposes, I can only show short clips of the episode, but rest assured, all of this is worth watching for very good reasons.
Why do boys and girls need separate bathrooms?
We begin here with Jones musing in the hall about gender things. His defining curiosity here pointed at the question of what really separates the men from the ladies. It's at this point Jones is called over by a friend into the boys' room. Despite being essentially a genderless robot, Jones has always been generally accepted as male by his classmates. A pretty typical way people respond to seeing essentially ungendered characters. Notice how a stick figure is a male until you give them a skirt and long hair, or how this yellow blob is a boy until you give it lipstick and a bow. It's another confusing and arbitrary facet of how places like the US deal with gender, which Robot here is going to have to deal with. On extending his questions to the boys' club, they begin rattling off warnings about what will happen to Jones if he exposes himself to the girls' bathroom, that they'll make him sick, that they're heinous demons to be avoided at all costs, that he should be afraid. Very afraid. Robot, still not attuned to the human penchant for hyperbole, starts to take these claims deadly seriously, especially as boys show up to continue to corroborate. Whoa, what's going on here? It was leftist propaganda all along. Long story short, by class time, the mere idea of girls terrifies Jones to the bone. And it's at this point the students are assigned electives, which, is that how school works in America? Who knows, maybe Americans. Two of the girls, Pam and Stacy, are assigned home ec, a revelation which leaves them none too pleased until it's revealed another girl has been assigned to work in the auto shop. The middle school auto shop. America? While this assignment actually seems to very much interest young Chrissy, this is immediately fodder for a torrent of laughter from the other girls. She got a guy class. You can sort of see where this is going. Girls get chastised when they don't get girl classes. Guys are relieved when they're assigned men things like metalworking and video game design. You win this round, gamers. Robot even joins in the mockery when a guy gets home ec, despite we as an audience knowing he doesn't really understand these arbitrary lines at all. And then he gets home ec.
Home ec? Home ec?
Home ec?
Now he's the butt of the joke, and worst of all, he's forced to work with girls. Robot still doesn't exactly know why he's supposed to be scared of girls, but he is, intensely, and this leads him to immediately retreat to work with the one boy in his class. I feel like this is an experience a lot of young lads can probably empathise with. As it goes, Robot has a knack for sewing, while Pam and Stacy decidedly do not. Noticing this, they decide to try and rope Jones into helping them. He announces his intense fear of them, declaring that his buddy Mitch told him they'd rip out his insides and make him vomit. Pam laughs this off, calls Mitch a liar, and assures Robot she just wants to get along. And that's pretty much how it goes. Jones even starts to make friends among the girls, readjusting his evaluation of girls from bad to okay. Now up to this point, it's been fairly standard moral lessons for kids. Boys and girls should both be treated with respect, nothing that's gonna rock the boat too much in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now comes the clincher.
Friends, you girl! You girl!
Am I a girl?
As he begins being chastised by the boys for his change in opinion regarding girls, Robot has gathered up to this point really the only thing socially separating boys and girls in this school is the fact that they have different interests. Except Jones likes boy and girl activities and seems to enjoy the girls' company even though boys apparently shouldn't, and none of this really makes sense. So Jones heads off into the girls' bathroom to hang out. They get some ideas of fun things to do, and whoop-de-doo, Jones has decided they might actually prefer being a girl. In this 2002 Cartoon Network show, the main character transitions from boy to girl. At least until a spat kicks off that only further complicates Robot's understanding of gender. The boys snatch him back from the girls, wipe off Robot's makeup, and insist they're being a traitor. Meanwhile, the girls return to try and reclaim Robot, and this starts to feel oddly similar to another episode I've already covered. The gender binary has, once again, fallen into simple tribalism. And just as before, our victim decides enough is enough and abandons both parties. Jones decides, after all this strange and contradictory data, to come to their own conclusions about this whole gender thing.
Final analysis, girls and boys are basically the same.
Now, there's a few things we can say that makes this early 2000s kids cartoon a bit messy in its own sort of way relating to conversations about LGBT issues. Robot is, after all, a robot, which leads to certain problems. Foremost is the fact that their decision to transition partway through the episode is treated as totally spur of the moment, based more on his robot mind just trying to grapple with the rational aspect of what defines gender. Now, there is a whole group of fun folks out there who do deal with gender in this way. They simply feel a certain way at a certain time. Absolutely fine, all power to them. The trouble in Robot's case is it would probably be a bit too easy for people looking at this episode in bad faith to conclude this is an example of quote-unquote trans-trenders. Someone simply choosing to transition because they're confused or want to feel like they fit in. Now, real actual evidence that trans-trending is a significant problem in any shape or form is basically non-existent, but when's that stopped people from attacking LGBT identities before? This is mostly just to acknowledge that it's a bit tricky to show something like this in an episode mostly comprised of the main character being confused about what gender is or what it means. But fucking hell, man, even more so than with our Lloyd example last video, this show is using children's entertainment to tackle subjects even adults can't have reasonable conversations about nearly 20 years later, without a Mad Libs rerun of the gay panic of prior decades. What's this going to do to my children? Well, by and large, absolutely nothing other than maybe make them feel a bit more comfortable with their identities if they decide to take an interest in something that, for some irrational reason, has been designated to that other gender. And I think it's fantastic that this show went there, that it moved past the simple inoffensive message that boys should respect girls and girls should respect boys, and into the territory of, hey, maybe these group designations really don't matter that much in the first place. Maybe the parts that may or may not be between your pants, you know, those parts most people will never even see, shouldn't come with this laundry list of predefined interests and behaviours that you must abide by or else be seen as some kind of twisted deviant. Maybe these distinctions just aren't that useful outside of very specific interactions between a person and their doctor. Maybe these strict frameworks of identity are actually what's confusing kids, far more than just telling them they're allowed to enjoy what they want to enjoy, behave how they'd like to behave as long as they're not being jerks. Maybe you can just wear a suit or wear a dress or put on some makeup or be the one that stays home with the kids. Maybe you don't need colours for girls. And maybe I can watch Sailor Moon and Powerpuff Girls. And maybe posing the question of why any of this needs to be so set in our minds as kids is a far more eye-opening one than demanding we work backwards to explain over and over and over again why it doesn't. Because these people who want nothing more than to live their lives comfortably, who really truly are not out to hurt anyone, maybe they have the right to that as much as you do. These are concepts, one way or another, we're all going to have to deal with, and having shows like those I've discussed here and in my last video that crack the door on that, perhaps aren't actually the cause for panic they were so deigned to be. And the code word is avocado toast. If you didn't use it in your comment, I know you didn't watch this to the end. Whew, okay, well, that was something. Again, I want to thank all of you who suggested these shows to me. Diving back into this topic this week has actually been a lot of fun. As I said, this was intended as just a brief return to the world of 90s cartoon queers before I delve into something much bigger, which hopefully you'll all be just as into. I'm going to be a bit more pushy about the old Patreon this time. Seriously, if all of you new folks gave $1, that would basically eliminate the piles of busy work that keep me away from just pumping out more of these. And you get more bonus content and unlockable goodies. If you can't do that, just sharing this video around on Reddit or Twitter or your local Discord could help just as much. There's also coffee for small one-time donations. If you want to keep up with the next episode's development, be sure to follow me over on Twitter, where I'll be posting most of my updates. You can also chat with me there about the video, or just comment down below. And hey, while you're down there, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and hit that bell button to actually know when things I make come out. More and more of you just keep popping up with each video, which is, you know, a good thing. Today I'd like to thank Alba, Alex Wenberg, Kristen Roars, Lepori Bay, Stephanie Bullard, Unnamed Muffin, Vrysha Gyrus, Owen Mateson, Peter Coffin, Sleepy Slug, Large Raccoon, Jordan Hoxie, Bira Yer, Dill, Michael Q. Warnock, and Holy Mittens. And most of all, a huge thanks to Evie Rosk, Letier, and Nick Schwer, and Kane Johnson and Colin Johnson. You, in all seriousness, make the channel possible. That about does it for now, so from the bottom of my heart, thanks for watching, love you all, and stay safe.